Welcome to this screencast about HTML5. So HTML5 is the new standard, came out in 2012, and basically it's modifying the old HTML401 standard. It adds some new features. It now has a canvas tag. It can now, as part of the standard, you have drag and drop. You have video and audio tags, which allow you to insert video and audio into your web page. Support for local storage instead of using cookies. It's a much more secure storage. Added semantic tags. In the previous versions of HTML, there weren't semantic tags that helped define what the content of the tags had. And there's several new input types. It also removes some old tags that just really weren't appropriate. The applet tag is no longer supported, doing most things using JavaScript instead of applets. The center tag, you don't need to center things using a tag. You use styles, and got rid of the whole frame set concept, which was actually quite ugly, but not used very much anymore. We're using style to actually change the shape and use layout of the HTML instead of frames. So the canvas tag is a new tag. It's a specific container for drawing graphics. The tag basically is canvas. Close it. You give it has an ID. You give it a height and width in pixels, so that's the size of the shape of your canvas. And then you use scripting, normally JavaScript, to actually get the document, get the canvas. In that first line, we're getting the canvas by getting the document by ID. We then get the context, which is the way we do our drawing from that canvas. And then we set some fill styles, and then when we fill a rectangle, that will create a red rectangle that is 150 pixels wide and 75 pixels high, starting at 0, 0. So you actually do the drawing in scripting, which can be quite convenient if you understand the scripting language and you understand what methods are supported by the context, etc. It's a very powerful way of drawing on the page instead of having a static image, because the script can actually remove things and modify the canvas. The other type of graphics is a scaled vector graphic. It's an SVG tag. It's basically a tag that contains XML inside of it. So what that means is that you create the tag, you give it the XML namespace, so that actually defines the kinds of XML tags that are legal inside the tag. You then create the different tags that do things like this is a polygon that has points, and then you set the style on the polygon similar to the style attribute. So this is, we're saying the fill is lime, the stroke is purple, and the stroke width is 5, and how we're going to fill it, even odd. The benefit of the scaled vector or scalable vector graphics is that the graphics are part of the document. They're actual XML that can be manipulated, whereas the graphics in the canvas are just manipulated by actually applying scripting to the canvas. So it's not like you know that there's a polygon in the canvas, it's just because the script put one there. It's which way you want to go is up to you. And which browsers support it is also a question. Drag and drop is part of the standard now. You do need JavaScript. To make something draggable, you set the attribute draggable to true. And so now this image is draggable. It can be dragged around. When the drag starts, we call the JavaScript drag method. And that method or function sets the contents of the dragging object. So you remember what's being dragged around. And then when we drop, we have targets, or we have HTML elements that have an on-drop attribute that says what method or function are we going to run when we drop whatever was dragged on top of it. And we also have on-drag over, which allows us to decide whether or not we will accept this particular object that's being dragged around. Again, they're JavaScript functions that handle the drop, and so they have to set the child elements of the current div, so or current element. So that's where we would take a look at the event, find out what the elements of the dragged object are, and then insert them into this HTML, this div target. But drag and drop is now part of the HTML standard. Before you'd have to get your own drag and drop JavaScript language libraries, but now it's part of standard. Video and audio, they decided to increase the tag, so now we have a video tag. Again, most browsers support it, but they don't all support the same formats. So you're going to have to worry about which formats are supported by which browsers. So inside the video tag and the audio tag, you have multiple source elements such that the browser is going to go through each source element and use the first one it recognizes. So if it supports MP4, you need a source that's an MP4. If it supports OGG, you need a OGG source. So that's not quite as nice. You have to support all these different browsers, but that's a pretty standard thing, and it's actually getting better these days than web development in the past. Most features now are pretty standard and are actually being supported by all the modern browsers. Local storage, this is a secure way of storing temporary data in the browser. As a replacement for cookies, which were just files that were put on the hard drive. It's stored locally in the browser. They're key value pair, and the local storage is only accessible by the page that is being rendered. So if you have a key value pair, it's not visible to another page or another script on a page, different page. So it's only visible, so it's local. It's very local. It's not, all cookies can be visible by many different websites on your machine. Local storage has no expiration date, so it's persistent, or session storage, which will be deleted when the browser window is closed. So once the browser window is closed, all that storage is deleted. Very good for session data. HTML5 added semantic elements. Prior to HTML5, we basically used divs and spans to hold the data that we were going to say, oh, in this div, we're going to put the header information in for our web page, or a navigation, or the section, or an article. Now, HTML5 has added actual elements for these semantic constructs. You still have to style them just like we have to style the divs and the spans to get them to lay out correctly, because just because you say it's an aside, that doesn't mean that it will automatically be rendered on the left side or the right side or in a box. You have to do the rendering of these semantic elements, or these HTML elements, on your own using the CSS. But it does make it easier when you're looking at the HTML, to actually know what the intent of that header is, because it says header versus div. Very nice feature for making the HTML look a lot better. And lastly, HTML5 has added a bunch new input types. We have a color chooser, date, time, email. It will validate the email, well, not validate, but make sure that you actually type in an email, month, number. Again, previous HTML5, we only had a text field. So the number input, make sure that they typed in a valid number and not 17Q. Range also says you can only have values from the range. Anything outside the range is just not selectable. A nice search input field, and a URL input field that, again, sort of validates that the URL you're passing in is correctly formatted. It doesn't validate that that's a valid URL, as in there is a resource out there with that URL, but it does make sure that you've got your protocol : / host or IP, and then a path to the resource, and does validate that that string is a legal constructed URL, and not that you put : curly brace something in there. So those are the new things to HTML5. Added a lot of neat features that make building web pages a little easier and making the HTML a lot easier to read and understand what it's trying to do. Thank you very much for your attention.